Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Today we're going to talk about GraphQL and how to use GraphQL both with Quarkus and Spring Boot, and what are the benefits and what are the differences. So without further ado, let's dive in. So let's first start with Quarkus. So I have a standard Quarkus application here in my person service. I put the links in the descriptions as always. So let's take a quick look. We can load the application. And now we're not starting with GraphQL, we're starting with standard REST. So what we have here, a bunch of methods. For example, we have find by first name, and find by first name given with a REST call like first name equals Homer will give us Homer Simpson. Can also say find by last name, and then we get everybody with Simpsons. This is done by standard REST call, find by last name, and then we have a query param last name equals Simpson. So far, so good. If we take a look at the controller here, so this with Quarkus, we are using JAX-RS, and we have get path annotations that do all of the stuff. So now let's take a look at GraphQL. For GraphQL, there is so-called GraphQL UI embedded, and this is something we can leverage. So instead now of doing REST calls, we can do queries. We can say query, and then we say find by last name. The system already tells, okay, then we have to fill in a parameter, which is last name, of course, and we say Simpson. Now I already get an error here that we must have a selection of subfields, but the system is already doing this for us. So this tells us, give me everybody with Simpson and at least return the ID. Okay, maybe the ID is not enough. We also want to have the first name, and we also want to have the last name. So this is already one of the key differences to concerning REST. One of the differences is we only have one endpoint, where with REST we have multiple endpoints. It's a little bit like SOAP for the people that remember that. Second, the client can tell which fields it wants from the server and which fields it does not. So going back, if we only want the ID, for whatever reason, we only get the ID. However, if we want to have also first name and last name, we also get that. Please keep in mind, this will only reduce the transport, the HTTP transport. The database will still be created with all of the fields. So we have now first name and last name. There's something missing, which is the address. And we can do the same here. We can say address, ID. Of course, this doesn't make sense. We also want to have the city and the street, and then everything will be returned, just like that. Okay, so now the question is, how does all of this work? So I'm going back here, and we take a short dip into the code. So similar to a standard REST application, where we have a class like this with JAX-RS and Quarkus. We have another controller class here, which is annotated with GraphQL. I get to the ToDos in a minute. Other than that, it's pretty similar. So we have our method here, find all, find for first name, find for last name, also say my name. And to indicate that this is a GraphQL method, we just have to say graph query and then give the name of the query. The query in this case is the same as the method name, but it has not been the same of the method name. The query name is the one that we will put in the GraphQL UI here. So find by last name. If we want to have Mickey Mouse here, we can also use Mickey Mouse, but then we have to use Mickey Mouse here, of course. The same with find by last name. And if there is a parameter passed in, we need to clarify this with add name. And that's mostly it. However, there is something going in the background that is Quarkus doing for us, and that is generating a schema. So what you need to know with GraphQL, every time we want to execute something, we need a so-called schema. And the schema describes the structure of the data and the method. And this is what we see here. We have a so-called GraphQL schema that has the objects of address and person, and also all the queries we have. Of course, we only executed 2 of them. That's pretty simple. So the address, of course, consists of city, street, and these are all strings, and the person also. What is interesting, however, is this exclamation mark. This exclamation mark indicates that this is a required field. Then there are the queries, and the queries are also pretty easy. So, for example, find by first name, and this has a parameter, and this needs to return something. If we have this braces here, this indicates that this is a list or an array. If we only have a person, it only returns a singular field. The nice thing is that Quarkus automatically generates these for us. We don't have to create this schema. If we take a look closer at Spring, I will get back to this. And it also automatically generates which fields are required and which are not required. And how is this done? Well, not only does Quarkus analyze our details of the project, it also analyzes the validation constraints that we put here. And as we have this as not null, it's possible for Quarkus to say, hey, this is a required field. So long story short, with Quarkus, it's very easy to have GraphQL. We need to have one dependency, which is small right GraphQL. We need to have a couple of annotations that are very similar to REST annotations. And then all of the things are done for us. We don't have to do anything here, which is very, very nice, honestly. Okay. So this is querying data. What about storing data? So storing data is done by something that is called a mutation, because we mutate data. That's also very easy. We just have to say on the save operation mutation save, and that's it. And then we can save data. Let's start the application again, and let's first look at the schema and what has changed. So get back here, and now we take a look at our schema. And we see the schema has changed, and we have additional values here. We don't only have the query and the required objects. We now also have a so-called mutation, which is save person input. Mind the input, that's important. And it returns a person. So what we also see here, we now have 2 additional objects, address input and person input. And they are just basically a copy of our standard objects. Unfortunately, this is required by GraphQL, because for GraphQL, it insists, if we have a mutation like this, that it cannot take the standard objects, but they need to be clarified as a so-called input. So what Quarkus again does for us in the background for the schema is just copying these objects, giving them a unique name with input, and then we can use it. Please mind that this does not mean that our method here needs person input, because if it would be like this, we would also need to have additional Java classes here. How is this working? I guess because person and person input just have the same data structure, and during serialization, the serializer does not take care of the type. So, but the nice thing is we don't need to care about all of this and all the funny things that GraphQL requires, because this is all done for us. Without mutations, we just have person and address, and with the mutation, we automatically get the copied address and person inputs fields. Okay, now let's save some data. So remembering we have the query, yeah, of course. I do not want to type this in, so I prepared this. So for mutation, we will now add Lisa Simpson, but it's basically the same. We say mutation and the name of the operation, which is save. We now pass in an object, person, and then we need to give all the fields of the person. And of course, it will also return a person. So I usually only need the ID, but if for every reason I want to have the first name here, I could also have the first name. And that's mostly it. Some things I would like to add here is you see the to-dos here. So the roles are allowed for authorization, needs some extra tweaking, and also the HTTP interceptor does not work. So this guide is taking care of getting tenant ID and other stuff. There is a way, I'm pretty sure, but currently this is only working with the standard controller. What is, however, working, and this is very interesting, you see that we have two separate classes, one for REST and one for GraphQL. It seems to be possible, with at least with Quarkus, that we can have GraphQL API also here, and then also have add query from GraphQL here. And this will give us REST and GraphQL within one controller. That's very interesting. I tried it out and it works. I don't know if this is intentionally, because, for example, with Spring, this is not working, but we will see this later. Okay, but that's enough for Quarkus. Let's take a look at Spring. So with Spring, I bring up my Spring Boot application, which is pretty similar to our Quarkus application. So there is my application. I again have find by first name, find by last name, like we're doing this with Spring. Very, very similar. And I also have GraphQL. So if you would not know, you would think this is the same application as with Quarkus. And it works pretty similar. However, there are some key differences. So the query works, and also my mutation should work. I will again copy this over from here. And this gives us an entry into the database. There is, however, one tedious difference. And if we go here, you see there is one link missing, which means that in contrast to Quarkus, Spring is not generating the schema. So we have to do this all by ourselves. The fun part is, at first I wrote this by myself and I went in some trouble because I did not know about the mutation stuff. And now finally, with what I had in Quarkus, I just copied over the GraphQL from Quarkus over here, and it works. So this schema GraphQL is the one from Quarkus, and of course it should work because the applications are pretty similar. If we take a look at the code, this is similar again to Quarkus. We have a controller here in Spring, as we have a controller also for REST, and we just have different annotations. So instead of having get mapping and request param, as we have for REST, we also have now query mapping, and we have add argument. And that's it. So from a code declarative perspective, it's pretty easy also with Spring to have a GraphQL controller in place. However, what makes it tedious is that you have to write all of this by hand, which also means that you need to have this for the mutation to copy around the objects. That is also something you need to do by hand. Also, what is not working, in contrast to Quarkus I showed you, it's not possible to have a controller class that has REST and GraphQL, at least not for now. And what's also unfortunately not working is native image support. So while it works, this still seems to be early stages for the for Spring. So for Spring, there is also one dependency which we need, which is not a big surprise. Spring Boot starter GraphQL, and this is in version 1. Anything, I think. And yeah, so hopefully they will improve. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you in the next video.